Hello. So today we're going to talk about what are the signs that you might be burning out. This is super important to talk about, especially for people in the mental health profession. So, counselors, listen up. Working in this field, we hear a lot of hard stories. We deal with a lot of crises, like talking to people who are feeling suicidal, maybe even homicidal, people who've experienced abuse, especially if that's children or vulnerable populations like the elderly, or even just intimate partner or domestic violence. But really, any kind of trauma can have an impact on us. So, vocab words for the impacts of this kind of work. So, burnout is the one we're going to focus on today, and probably the one you've heard of the most. But there's also things called secondary traumatic stress, compassion fatigue. Now, those are all more negative impacts of this kind of work. There's also good stuff too when it comes to hearing a bunch of traumatic stories and hard things. So, compassion satisfaction and post traumatic growth are both positive impacts of hearing trauma stories. So, compassion satisfaction, meaning the satisfaction we get out of having compassion and sitting with people through these hard stories, but also watching people be resilient to their trauma impacts us too. So, we can grow from being there with them while they grow. Now, what makes sessions that are already about hard topics harder for us? Freud would call it countertransference, but really our stuff coming out on the client. So if the client is talking about a topic or acting like someone from our life that is kind of subconsciously without our awareness getting brought up, um, or examples where clients are expressing different values or beliefs than the counselor might have, and the difficulty that comes from that not aligning sometimes, especially with our hot button issues. I mean, if you're in this field, you're probably relatively good about keeping yourself separate and non judgmental to your clients. But all of us will have those certain issues or topics that just hit harder for us. So when that comes up, that can be really difficult for clients. This is a really common one with counselors, our history with conflict or dealing with people who are angry. I've seen many, many counselors be super comfortable with dealing with other feelings like sadness and anxiety and things like that. But anger, in my experience as an educator, seems to be the one that most new counselors are kind of scared of. Usually that has something to do with how we've grown up dealing with angry people. And so that stuff can come out in these sessions. Additionally, self-disclosure, you might have heard of. That's just the vocab word for when we share something about our own lives with a client. And some theories and research backs up that this can be helpful, but you want to ask yourself, am I sharing this thing about me for the client because I really think that they're going to get something out of this and it'll be for the betterment of them? Or are we kind of lying to ourselves about that and really we're wanting to share that for us because we're feeling uncomfortable and there's something about disclosing our experience that's helping that relieve some kind of stress for us. And so we want to watch out for that. There's this other vocab word, shared trauma, which essentially means when a client and a counselor are both at the same time experiencing some form of trauma. So imagine during 9/11, during Hurricane Katrina, maybe during COVID, if counselors and clients were at the same time experiencing their own individual trauma of the same exact experience, what that then is like to treat clients at the same time while you yourself are experiencing the same trauma. It's really difficult. And then relatedly, it's just having shared experiences with clients. So say you have your own trauma related to anything. Let's say you have experienced some kind of sexual assault before, and now here comes a client talking about their own sexual assault. Now, those are not the exact same experience. You both weren't there at the same time, so it's not shared trauma, but you have a shared experience, and hearing about that can then trigger stuff for you. So, with all of that being said, what are the signs that you might be starting to feel burnt out? So, Really, there's kind of three main categories of symptoms or signs of this. The first one is you're starting to feel emotionally exhausted. Now, that can look like having less energy, feeling just generally more depleted. If you are feeling now overextended, kind of overwhelmed a little bit more easily, and just generally fatigued, those are all signs that you might be suffering from some emotional exhaustion. Depersonalization, that might look like you are starting to kind of withdraw from life, from work, starting to maybe isolate a little bit more. You could be distancing yourself from work. Maybe you started, probably likely, with a lot of passion and excitement for your work, and you're starting to find yourself to be a little bit more cynical, a little bit more jaded. This is super common in our line of work, and the thing about burning out is I want you to think there had to have been a fire there first for then you to have burnt out. So we're not talking about people who started a job they could care less about. These are those of you who loved your job, were excited to start this job, maybe a little nervous, but generally excited. And then over time, just the impact of some of your work was then leading you to experience all of these things, kind of starting to be a little bit more withdrawn, less excited about work, more cynical, like, oh, I'm just expecting the worst because I've been experiencing the worst. And then lastly, professional inefficacy, which just means that generally you're feeling less productive, like your work doesn't really matter, that you're less accomplished, that people don't really care about what I'm doing. Those are all different signs of burnout. Now, burnout and something like secondary traumatic stress are different because burnout is kind of a slow burn. This is something that over time just eats away at you little by little, where secondary traumatic stress is usually when you've listened to some kind of really traumatic thing and it's more of an intense impact shorter term. Secondary traumatic stress looks a little bit more like PTSD. Secondary traumatic stress is different than PTSD because you are secondarily impacted by somebody else's trauma. So you hearing about the client's trauma is now traumatizing you. And so it's really similar to PTSD, but it's not your own trauma, it's somebody else's. But that can similarly, in the way that it might be impacting the client, have you starting to have some avoidance behaviors, maybe some hopelessness, some numbing of your emotions. So while this video is focused a little bit more on burnout, I just wanted you to know that there's different versions of how hearing about trauma and hard things can impact us as professionals. Now, what do we do about that? So this is going to look a little bit different for everybody, but generally it's taking care of yourself, right? So first and foremost, when you are dealing with difficult cases or difficult stories from clients, it's always a good place to start with supervision or consultation. Think about the people in your field that you are closer to or feel like you can be really vulnerable with. This might not be your boss. Well, if you're a student or an intern, you might have to go directly to your supervisor first as part of your crisis policy. But generally, you want to be able to talk openly and vulnerably to the people that you'd be talking to in this moment. So if you are kind of trying to save face because this person is the person who pays your paycheck and maybe you're worried like, oh my gosh, are they going to fire me if they hear that I'm at all like human and having hard feelings. You want to pick somebody that you know you can be safe with. And so having that consultation, being honest, like, hey, when I'm talking to this client, this stuff is getting brought up for me. Or even just having supervision generally and talking about clients, you might not even be aware that this is happening, that you're self disclosing more or getting pushed in sessions more. And it might just be from you consulting generally with your cases that then your supervisor or one of your peers can kind of point out, hey, I've been noticing that you seem to be doing X, Y, or Z. Or, hey, how are you doing? It seems like your energy is just kind of low lately. You seem like you're having a hard time. I just want to check in. And so having those relationships can really help keep you in check, especially when you yourself maybe aren't aware that burnout is happening. I couldn't be a counselor if I didn't talk about wellness. So think about all the different areas of wellness, right? We've got emotional wellness, physical, social, intellectual, occupational, financial, environmental, and spiritual. So all of these different areas of wellness, we're never going to be 100% in all of them, but especially in times of conflict within ourselves, it's important to maybe pick one area of wellness that seems to have dropped lately. Put a little bit more effort into that one, whichever one of that you think will be the most important and impactful for you in that moment. Put a little bit more effort once a week, once a day. What little 5-minute thing can I do? Or if I have the time and resources, can I give more to it, to that one area of wellness? So, say, for example, I'm going to start intentionally going on a walk every morning, or I'm going to intentionally try to give myself at least one more meal a day or a week that's more nutritious than I have been because I've been slacking off. Or maybe, I haven't hung out with my friends in a long time. I'm going to try to schedule at least one outing a month with one of my friends. Whatever that looks like for you in a realistic way, intentionally focusing on one area of your wellness can really do the whole rising tides float all ships thing. Bringing up one area of wellness is likely going to kind of pull up some of the others too. And that's just going to help protect you a little better from the impacts of this kind of work. So making sure to take care of yourself. And of course, I will always be an advocate for doing your own personal counseling, especially when things like this are happening and you can kind of process through and get, again, another set of safe ears to listen to what's going on and maybe call you on some stuff you might not be recognizing. But of course, I need to end this with recognizing the work that you are doing for this community is so valuable. And a lot of times we can be kind of invisible heroes, and not get recognized for the, in some way, sacrifice that we're making to be the person who hears all of these hard things from other clients. And I don't want to scare you if you're a brand new counselor. This is not going to be all of your clients, not going to be all of your sessions that you're feeling burnt out eventually from. But there might just be seasons of life, especially if you're going through something outside of work and then having difficult cases at the same time. It can wear on us because we are human. So please, please, please be well and do good.